We all have a hobby, right? We all have something to keep our minds occupied, or something we do on a down low when no one else can probably see us. Some people like watching birds. Some people like collecting stamps. Some people like to browse Reddit. Well, there's that. But for me, I have my own personal hobby, and that would be miniature wargaming. Now, for those who are probably wondering what the heck miniature wargaming is, well, to put it in simple terms, miniature wargaming is having little miniature figures play on a tabletop or board-like game. Right? Normally, you have around at least a lot of them, like 100, well, maybe not 100, but a lot of war games to simulate like army battles or small skirmish battles on the tabletop, with the accompaniment of dice, cards, and tokens, and many other board game-esque kind of things that you would use. Now, despite how niche this may sound, wargaming is a very popular hobby, and has been going on for quite some time, ever since 1913, with little wars created by H.G. Wells in Persia, I believe. It was so popular that from that point, D&D was originally a war game. Well, somewhat a war game. I think it started out like that. I think it started as normal just a tabletop game, which then expanded into somewhat war game miniatures. But that's a story for another time. Now, I got into the hobby not through, well, normal means. Well, depending on how you see it, if you see it as normal means. I got into the hobby via the most popular choice of wargaming, that being Warhammer 40k. Now, at this point, everyone knows what Warhammer is. I know what it is. You know what it is. I bet your grandma knows what it is. Hell, I bet she's planning her 4th army right now as we speak. Which is why most people who are into the miniature wargaming hobby probably start out with Warhammer in general, or at least some subset of Warhammer in its ever-expanding media. Now, this leads back to how I first discovered Warhammer and how I first got into the miniature hobby, but not yet. You see, while despite me starting out with Warhammer, it wasn't really a miniature game. It was the video games, actually. Specifically, Dawn of War, Dark Crusade. Now, Dawn of War in itself is another part of the Warhammer. It's really beloved and really well popular amongst fans of the Warhammer. But, you see, the thing is that when I was a kid, I didn't know it was Warhammer. I generally didn't know what a Warhammer was. All I saw was, weird robot with green eyes, and it was all about this tactical stuff, and I was like, this seems interesting. And when I played it for the first time, I realized that, oh crap, you can build armies with this stuff, and have them go in and fight each other, and do all this kind of madness. I didn't really pay attention to everything else beside it. I didn't know it was part of this bigger franchise before me. And soon after, when I was done playing it, I completely forgot about it. Well, not the game itself, most of its connections to Warhammer. I didn't know what it was. I just thought it was just some random game I bought. And that was it. I didn't want to go buy miniatures. I didn't want to go do any comics or White Dwarf or whatever. I just kind of left it there. I just kept playing it. Till eventually I forgot about it. It wasn't until when I reached probably, let's say, around maybe, I think I was just starting 6th form. That's college for us people in the UK. When I started picking up the actual miniatures. And well, fortunately for me, when I first saw miniatures, I was like, hey, this is just like that game I bought when I was a kid. Yeah, I wasn't really the brightest kid back then. And so from that point, I started to get into the hobby. I did very slowly. Funny enough, the army I started off with when I first got miniatures was orcs. And if you're a fan of Warhammer, you know orcs. They are literally the most hyperactive, violent race among most of the Grimdark universe. Constantly bashing things, and just by the miracle of their own sheer force of will, it works. But hey, you gotta start somewhere in the hobby. And that's when I started. Since then, I've gone and painted and done up a few armies of myself. Chosen. I think after Orcs, I started going to Space Marines, but that never really went anywhere. Not that I don't have a problem with Space Marines, just especially with nowadays how GW likes to, show off their favorite blue boy, their giant armored Smurf in front of everything. It's kind of exhausting. But hey, milk that cow before it turns dry. Or that Space Marine. Okay, let's change the topic before this turns into a weird thing. So from there, I started to look more into Warhammer as a franchise. I started to look more about the lore, look more about other armies and other species. I started to learn more about what exactly is the 40k universe, and why it is the way it is, and why it's grimdark most of the time. And from that point, I expanded to its parallel universe, being Warhammer Fantasy. And I started learning more about the miniatures in that model range and franchise, and stuff relating to that. And yeah, from that point, I was really hooked into the miniature hobby. However, there was two big problems with being a Warhammer fan. Now, you see, at the risk of doxing myself, I live in a small part of England called Luton. And since it's such a small place, no one around me in this place knows what Warhammer is. Or at the very least, I haven't really encountered them yet, as there are no Warhammer stores here in Luton. There are some near the areas around Luton, but they are way too far in between for me to travel just to go see some plastic men. Speaking of plastic men, that devolves into my second problem with Warhammer. It is way too complicated for me. Yeah, that whole comment about me not being a bright kid, that expanded into adulthood too. As much as I tried to learn how to play Warhammer, and I couldn't do it. The game was way too complicated for me. I couldn't understand a not single thing about it, but it didn't really help. I tried my best to learn. Heck, I even started watching some battle reports, and some of them are fine. Although, when I first started, I'm not gonna lie, I kind of started to fall asleep with them. They were just so convoluted, and that extended into being boring as hell. Now, if you're into how Warhammer plays, that's good for you. I'm glad that you have enjoyment in it. But it didn't really vibe for me. It wasn't really my thing, and it kind of fizzled out for me. I still like collecting the models and looking at all the stuff, but it just wasn't my thing. And I was kind of left in a little bit of a conundrum for myself. That was until I discovered solo miniature war games. Yes, solo wargaming. Something that I didn't really think or thought would exist back when I first started picking up the miniature hobby as it is. Generally, I just thought war game was just built for, more than one person, obviously, and it wasn't really meant for individuals, because who plays alone, right? Well, tons of people apparently, as there are tons of solo miniature war games, stuff that I didn't even know existed, to be honest. You got the two most popular ones, that being Frostgrave and Stargrave, created by the same person, Joseph McCullough. I'm probably butchering that, always the Sunday. Well, we'll just call him Joseph for now. Anyways, he created these two games, one being fantasy, one being sci-fi. And, well, it was designed to be, a simple skirmish game. Get at least 10 miniatures per warband, and, you got certain classes, certain abilities, certain structures, and you play it solo or with people. But the solo rules are what we're here focusing on. And from that, you create your own story with it, your own campaign, your own anything really, as long as you're just playing and having fun. But the best part of it was that it was miniature agnostic. Now, for those who don't know what that means, it means you can use any miniature you want. Any kind, any form, any material, whatever, as long as it just fits for the most part. But then, that's what kit bashing is for. And that, to me, was the greatest appeal to it, as I had access to any miniatures I could probably think of. Now, there's one thing I didn't mention before about Warhammer. I know I said I collect Space Marines, but I also did collect another army, that being Tau. Yes, the Space Weeb Communists. Those guys with the weird splits in their foreheads. I'm gonna be honest. If it wasn't for these guys, I probably wouldn't have been as cemented into the Warhammer mythos as I am now, to be honest. Right? Because despite everything that this faction has, them being relatively good guys, them not being as grim dark as every other faction, I love these guys. They're just fun. Right? Given the multiple different races, despite the fact that GW doesn't really make the other races, and they're always relies on this laser weapon, on the mechas, or the different I forgot what they're called, but mechs that they have. I think something like Storm Surge, Ghost Neil, stealth suits, and just the whole aesthetic of the town. I think without that, I probably wouldn't have been into the Warhammer hobby as much. Probably would have given up after Space Marines maybe. Back to Frostgrave and Stargrave, I used my Tau to create one of my very first warbands for Stargrave. And from that, I started collecting more miniatures, and more miniatures, and more, until I feel like I was cemented into the main miniature hobby, even more. Because I know that most of the hobby is just around Warhammer, and any other random multiplayer, like, miniature hobby. But for me, it was just more collecting, creating new warbands, creating new different types of solo adventures, and it kind of expanded my options of miniatures. Like, as in, I started collecting more of the North Star miniature figures that come from, were made for Frostgrave and Stargrave. And there's some good miniatures. I personally am a big fan of the scavenger ones, and I just like the aesthetic of it. And from that point, I moved on to other miniature war games like Infinity by Corvus Belli. Honestly, their miniatures are beautiful when you paint them right. And I think that sci-fi aesthetic is really good for Stargrave. Solo war game I also discovered was one-page rules. Now, this war game was actually designed as an alternative for Warhammer. So, it was for those who, it was made by guys who found Warhammer to be a little bit too complicated and too frustrating in a sense. And so they redesigned it to put it on one page. Not physically, TurboGrafx shows 2 pages, but you get the whole point. So, when I discovered that, and I found out what it was, I started to play it, and I got honest, it's pretty damn good. Because ultimately, it was like,
Finally,
a
game system for me!
And so, I went ahead and I played it. Now, with one-page rules, the best part, in my opinion, is that you can use any miniature you want, similar to that of Stargrave and Frostgrave. Because all you need is the rules. The miniatures is all up to you. If you, like, because every miniature, right, that you get could be an alternative to a faction. For example, you got the Human Defense Army. I think I said that right. Yeah, Human Defense Army. And essentially they're like Imperial Guard, but you don't have to play them as Imperial Guard. You can use any miniature you want. If you want to use a normal military man, do it. If you want to use some of the Stargrave miniatures, do it. Heck, if you want to use a bunch of troll miniatures or goblins or whatever, call them Human Defense, do it. No one's going to stop you from doing it anyways. And so with that, I decided to use what miniatures I have roaming around the house, and started to play one-page rules. And I've been playing for a long time now. I think since, I don't know, maybe a year or so, maybe half a year. And I've had some good times. And then recently, well, somewhat recently, like maybe a few years ago actually, but I don't know, I wasn't really into the hobby, into the game actually when that happened, but they had this thing called Army Builder, which allowed you to make your own army, consisting of any miniatures you want, and actually make rules and stats and everything. And I think when that happened, I think the floodgates for my imagination were open as well. Because I was able to make any army I chose. Currently, I have at least, well, 5, maybe 4 actually functioning armies that I have. And I use with the miniatures I got. And when I did that, I was able to use any other miniatures I wanted to make armies of my own. So, like for example, I have this other miniature game series called War Machine. Now, War Machine, it's not really, well, it is popular, I'm not going to deny that, but not a lot of people play it, for my record at least. And currently, right now, their models are kind of disappearing all over the place, so I'm not really able to get. So I decided, well, since I don't really know how to play it, but I still want to have the models, I decided to pick up whatever pieces I can probably find and use them to create my own model in a one-page rule. And with that, that's pretty much how I got into miniatures. That's how I love miniatures. Yeah, I know it wasn't really the most conventional way of getting into it. I didn't follow with Warhammer 40k that much. I didn't play any historical games or anything like that, like Bolt Action, but I think this is the fact that I managed to get into it in my own weird way. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people got into the same way I did too, with Stargrave and Frostgrave. And I think that fact alone is good enough reason to say why I love miniature war games. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Feel free to send a like, subscribe, and put a comment down below and say how you guys got into the wargaming hobby. Thanks, and see you later.